Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing limiting beliefs, the subconscious mind, relaxation, direct suggestion, overcoming failure, and how to get into the zone. And the guest I have coming on couldn't be a better person for today's episode. Her name is Kathy Pickel. She's a certified clinical and medical hypnotherapist from the Atlanta Center for Hypnosis Training. She's also certified as a consulting hypnotherapist from the National Guild of Hypnotists. Kathy also received her bachelor's degree from the Georgia State University in psychology. She's also a certified Neuro Linguistics Programming practitioner. Without further ado, I want to welcome Kathy Pickel to the Sports Mastery Podcast. Kathy, what are you up to? And if I missed anything in your bio, please tell us more.
Oh, wow, Deshaun, no, that was great. I would like you to go around in front of me everywhere I go introducing me. That sounds wonderful. I am a sports hypnotherapist. I do a lot of different hypnotherapy, but I definitely have a big interest in sports performance and do a lot of work in that field.
How did you get into working on the sports performance side or working with athletes?
Well, I was an athlete myself, and I have a lot of athletes in my family. Two of my sons are athletes, and I've just always been interested in that. I've coached several seasons, different sports, and it's just always been part of who I am.
Is there a particular sport or type of athletes that you offer your service to more than others or gravitate towards?
I feel like I get certain types of clients more than others. I don't sell to certain types of clients more than others. I was a basketball player. My sons are basketball players. And I've had golfers, tennis players. I had someone who shoots clay pigeons, and I had an archer. I've had several different types of athletes, but the majority of the guys I get and the girls are tennis players, golfers, and basketball players. That seems to be who I see the most. I've had a couple of pitchers, and actually I love working with pitchers, baseball pitchers. But definitely golfers and tennis players are probably who I see the most.
You know, I grew up playing baseball and basketball and football for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was times where, I played running back. Sometimes I would play inside receiver, punt returner, kick returner. And sometimes you're told that you're not fast enough, you're not big enough. There's been times where, you know, I grew up pitching, playing shortstop. You know, I've had some bad games. And sometimes those games, you know, or you can continue to make errors. And it could be because you're believing in something that you might not even know about, or it could be the self-talk.
For sure.
And I wanted to get into, you know, some athletes, they remain on the second team or the third team or scout team. They never get to the level that they have in their mind. And it's hard for them to figure out. It can often be quite frustrating for the student athlete and the parent. And they can also be missing out on opportunities. And I know part of that goes back to limiting beliefs. I'm glad you're on today. I'd like for you to discuss limiting beliefs regarding the student athlete and, you know, what you have around that.
Sure. I like to start with a quote by Muhammad Ali. He has a lot of great quotes that really apply to sports and all facets of life. But it isn't the mountains ahead to climb that are going to wear you out. It's the pebble in your shoe. And that's how I think about limiting beliefs. And so really what we do is start with not so much trying to eliminate that fear as to replace it. Any limiting beliefs you have, it's easier to replace them than to just take them out. And so we really start off by listing exactly how you want to think, feel, and act in your sport, by really defining in specific terms the kind of athlete you want to be. And that's really the approach to eliminating that interference, is to replace it with new beliefs.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that a student athlete should list out how they want to think, feel, and act
100%. It's definitely better to replace. A lot of times you won't even know what type of limiting beliefs you have. And so it's always better to pull yourself into the future with a vision of the future than it is to try to remedy memories of the past.
So does this kind of similar synergize with, like, we hear the term journaling? Is that how they would do that?
Definitely. I'm sorry. I just wasn't thinking in terms of them doing it on their own. I'm trying to readjust my thinking right now. Without a doubt, writing things down can be very beneficial. Let's
Okay.
get more specific on something. It's really going to be about Bob Rotella, as done a lot of famous mental edge training when it comes to sports. And there are three things he starts off with all his athletes. He wants them to understand personal responsibility. He wants them to hold themselves accountable. And he wants them to understand that they have free will. So if you'll just bear with me, Deshaun, this will come back around to your question.
Sure.
All that stuff kind of boils down to, you need to understand the master-servant relationship between your mind and your body, or between your thoughts and your feelings. You really need to understand that your thoughts control your feelings rather than the other way around. A lot of guys will start getting led by their feelings, and that can last short term, but it usually always comes back to bite you, because guys they have limiting beliefs, which most people do. What I wanted to talk about was that relationship between your thoughts and your feelings. And you really need to understand that your thoughts control your feelings, and you need to get that relationship right. When you have a negative thought or a negative feeling, if you take accountability for that, you can change it. You need to be aware of it to change it, obviously. And that master-servant relationship between your thoughts and your feelings can really help you to perform at your peak if you understand that you're responsible for those feelings and that you can change them.
So say I'm the athlete. I play linebacker. I'm a junior. I'm getting into playing linebacker. I've played on the D line before, so I'm technically learning, how to play a new position, but it fits my body type. I have the potential to be good at that position, but I'm struggling right now. So, I'm always kind of insecure. I kind of move with hesitancy on the field. I'm a little apprehensive to make mistakes or talk to my coaches. And then when I get critiqued, I could maybe oftentimes I take it a little more personal than I should. What would you say to the athlete in that position in regard to beliefs and helping them overcome some of their barriers?
Well, definitely. You can see how there'd be a problem there, because failing to prepare, of course, adds a lot of pressure. So when it's a new position and a kid doesn't quite feel prepared for it, it's definitely easy for him to fall into that trap of doubting himself. And so, of course, what you're aiming for is to be congruent in your thoughts, feelings, and actions. And that's going to be really good for that guy to get congruent on those things. Because when you're congruent on your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, when they're all moving the same way, well, then you become quite a force to be reckoned with. And then you're a tank. And you know what they say about a tank. Things don't happen to you, you happen to things. And that's really what you're aiming for.
So Kathy, when you're working with whether it's a high school student athlete, middle school, or someone in college, how would you explain that to the athlete, or maybe the athlete and their parent, as far as being congruent with your thoughts, feelings, and actions?
Well, the first thing, like I said before, is you're really going to have to make sure that you are prepared for that position. And to get congruent in those three things, you're really going to have to learn how to manage your emotions. And, the way to think about your emotions is that they're precious fuel. And so when that fuel is motivating you toward pulling yourself toward a vision of the future that you really want to happen, you're going to be in a good spot to really perform at your peak. But if you should have if you should be using that precious fuel, using those emotions on things like negative thoughts about yourself or negative thoughts about your coach or your environment or your family, anything like that, you're going to find that you're really not congruent and you tend to be kind of a little bit of a mess going through life rather than, aiming at one specific goal and really letting your vision of the future pull you to it.
Yeah, you know what? What you're telling me, it makes sense. So part of overcoming limiting beliefs, as far as if you find yourself in a particular circumstance or situation or finding yourself wanting something, it's almost like you have to, like you said, you have to prepare for it. You have to prepare for that properly, and you have to be objective, as far as like how much time or effort that you're going to put into
Sure.
this particular circumstance or situation.
Sure, for sure. You definitely have to train yourself. And more important than that, you have to trust yourself. And that's really where your confidence is going to come in, right? Like your confidence is nothing more than just an aggregate of the beliefs you have about yourself. So that's really what your confidence is. So if you're learning a new position, it's going to be important that you have those thoughts about yourself all aligned and moving in the right direction. Again, that's just how you're going to spend that emotion. You're going to spend it on having positive thoughts about yourself and about what you're doing. And anyone learning a new position, I would spend a lot of time visualizing. And the way you really want to visualize to get the most out of it is going to be to put yourself in a comfortable place, in a comfortable spot, to really relax, and then to go through the motions, to visualize it and try to put all 5 of your senses in that scenario. Your mind doesn't really, when you are relaxed, it can't so much tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. Practicing in your mind is probably about 60 to 70% as good as practicing with your body. It really does a lot of good. And so if you are in a new position, I would spend a lot of time visualizing, and in visualizing, put all 5 of your senses in that scenario. So if you're a football player, smell that grass, feel the ball, really get involved in that scenario and visualizing it. Put all 5 of your senses there if you can.
I like what you're telling me about limiting beliefs, and I can see where you're going, because it kind of has that aspect of the subconscious mind. And how does the subconscious mind relate to overcoming limiting beliefs?
Well, I tell you what, a good way to think about your conscious mind and your subconscious mind is using the analogy of a horse and a rider. So obviously the rider is in charge, but let that horse get away from you and you'll know who really has the power. Your subconscious mind is very much like that horse. And so if it's not trained, trained to do the right thing, you're going to run into trouble. And I've heard a lot of golfers talk about this. Say you shoot in the high 70s and you're used to shooting there, but you're really trying to improve your game. And so you go out one day, you've been training a lot. You go out one day to play, and the front 9, you do really well. You're on track to come in under par. And maybe the 10th and the 11th hole, you're right there. But if your subconscious mind believes that you always shoot in the high 70s, before that game is done, it's going to rectify the situation. You're going to get a lot of extra strokes on those last few holes and end up shooting in the high 70s. So you have to really be careful about how you view yourself and what you think about yourself. All your mind really has to work with are the words you feed it and the pictures you feed it. So you need to be really careful of what you give to your mind.
I really like that, what you said about the mind and being careful about the words you feed it and the pictures. Right. What would be an example of that as far as words and pictures?
I'll tell you a good example. You got to learn to love the things that even you don't love to do. Say if you're out running on a hot day and it might not be your favorite activity, but you need to put that type of work in. You need to tell yourself, I love training. I love running these sprints. I love running these hills. Whatever it is you're doing, you tell yourself you love that. And before you know it, you will. Your mind loves repetition. It loves doing what is familiar, and it loves giving you what you want. So make sure that you're feeding it the right instructions. Whatever you tell it you really love, whatever you feel like you really like, it's going to try to get you that activity.
So if I'm a student athlete and I'm listening to this episode, and if I'm a sports parent and maybe even a youth coach, one thing I definitely will want to be vigilant about if I'm listening to you is self-talk, and particularly negative self-talk, and figuring out ways to pull that out.
For sure. That without a doubt is the first thing that athletes need to be aware of. And again, it comes back to taking personal responsibility, holding yourself accountable, and knowing that you have free will. When you have negative thoughts, when you find that you're falling into habituated patterns of negative thoughts or maybe predicting negative outcomes, you want to change that as soon as you can. That's definitely not a game you want to play.
Yeah, so it definitely sounds like you're giving us some tools and strategies, to change the dialogue that we have with ourselves, or the monologue per se.
Yeah, the monologue, really, again, it's going to come back to knowing that your thoughts are the master over your feelings. You're going to have to really sit down and examine feelings if you have negative ones, and know that it's very easy to fall into habituated patterns. When you're having a negative thought, you can think to yourself, am I really experiencing this right now? Or am I re-experiencing something that happened to me in the past and I just keep reliving it? Because most of the time, that's what's going on.
Listening to you, Kathy, you keep talking about the master and the servant,
right,
and of the mind, and it kind of reminds me of Maxwell Malt's work. Did you read his material, Psycho-Cybernetics?
I have not.
Yeah, I mean that analogy is definitely discussed in there.
Oh,
and it is very specific as far as the master and the servant relationship of the mind and ourselves and our actions.
Yeah,
like exactly how you explained it.
Definitely, definitely, I see a problem, and I think it's I think it's kind of a trend is people putting their feelings ahead of their thoughts. And when you get upside down like that, you're in for trouble. It's easy to do because when you have good positive emotions that really spur you on and really get you into action, it's easy to get hooked on that adrenaline. But if you don't understand that the negative thoughts you have can be changed, if you let those, if you don't understand that those negative feelings that you have can be changed, you're going to wind up getting in trouble because those negative feelings will just keep coming back. They'll keep coming back over and over again if you don't realize that you have the power to change them. And you do. If you're a student athlete and you're looking to compete on a higher level, get a scholarship, you're going to have to take responsibility for your feelings and know that you can change those feelings.
The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the parent to work through together. The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the coach to work through together. It was created in a sense and in a way to bridge the gap in communication between these parties and build a successful relationship dynamic. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/workbook or check out the show notes page and click on the link. And now back to the show. You're saying something really key here, Kathy, because, I often discuss social intelligence with my athletes and I discuss emotional intelligence. And what comes along with that is, like you said, having a person or individual, whether an athlete or non-athlete, being able and being comfortable expressing their emotions and realizing that that's okay. And on a deeper level, having someone that they can trust to talk to, whether it's someone like you that might be a certified hypnotherapist, a coach, a parent, somebody that has a mentorship program like myself, but somebody that they can talk to and kind of recognize those feelings and knowing when to go, to start thinking or feeling different, like you said.
For sure, Deshaun, for sure. And anyone with boys definitely should get the point across that discussing your feelings is strength, not weakness. And a lot of people with with young men, raising young men, will really put forth this whole toughness attitude, which is great. Everyone should be resilient, but they need to understand that strength is really going to be talking about and being open about your feelings so you can align them with your actions and your thoughts.
I think sometimes we're held back, collectively because we've been taught to internalize.
Mm-hmm.
And it could also be, in the wrong scenarios, circumstances, and situations, it could lead to an identity crisis. It could lead to depression and a whole bunch of other harmful things.
Definitely, Deshaun. And, in the sports world, I think that's kind of a slippery slope too. The difference between training and performing is night and day. Those are two completely different, training and performing are two completely different activities. And when kids come from maybe homes that have been through hardship, it's easy for them to excel in training, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will excel in the performance. And often that's where you'll see the breakdown. You can have kids that go through training and practice and do extremely well, and then that doesn't always translate to performance, often because of limiting beliefs or because of how they deal with fear.
Got you. And it's interesting that you bring that up because, on the training side, you could label one as stress, but when it comes to performance or competition, there's always an outcome. Mm-hmm. So then there's the whole pressure component.
Yeah.
And, relating all of that to limiting beliefs, your subconscious mind, this leads us to the part of the conversation, being able to relax on game day. Mm-hmm. Or in competition, or on a max effort training day, how do you discuss that with the folks that you work with, Kathy?
Everything follows the breathing. That's where it all starts. And when you really take responsibility for the outcome, you will start by evening out your breathing and becoming relaxed in a performance type situation. And that's going to help you to get in the flow state. And it's going to help you to really succeed and get to your peak potential in performance. Another thing about that, Deshaun, is the fear of failure seems to really hold back a lot of guys right now, a lot of kids right now. The failure isn't the problem, it's the fear. People who are successful fail often. They fail well. They fail a lot. And there seems to be, the word failure seems to have just blown up over the last 10 years to be much worse than it used to be. We hold people in lower esteem for failures rather than seeing that as part of their growth. And it's easy to see the guys who are successful, they fail often and they fail well. They keep doing it. And if you're not failing, you need to really look at where you are because I'll bet your growth has stopped.
It's like you could see where my thoughts were. Like you were a mind reader because, I've worked with several athletes in the past where they might be quote unquote genetically gifted, or maybe they hit a growth spurt sooner than other kids their age, or they're on this particular all-star team or select team year after year. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they get to a point where things start to level out and they're afraid to jump out there because they're used to being the best.
Yeah.
Or they're afraid to go to the next level and they get content. Because they're scared to fail, that now they're in a position where, the other competition is just as big, just as fast, can shoot just as good, can throw the ball just as well. What would you say to the individual and definitely like the sports parent? Because sometimes I'm sure you've worked with people, maybe they coddle the young athlete too much as far as letting them get out in the water and swim on their own in terms of overcoming failure, where you have to go through, I guess, these learning curves to break through your barriers to hit another level versus being like stagnated and like you've heard it. Oh, he never got better than he never got any better after his sophomore season, or he never got any better after the 8th grade.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think the parents often are just as afraid of failure as the kids are. And that is just a killer. You've got to be able to just eat up failure and to seek it out. If you're not putting yourself in a position where you can fail, you're not swimming in the right pool. If you're not failing often, you're not trying hard enough. You're not going up against the best opponents. And, really that's a component for flow state too, isn't it? Where you have to be challenged to a certain level before you can even go into flow state. And so you need to be seeking out those situations. I would definitely tell all the parents, be seeking out those situations for your athletes where they can fail, and let them fail and be happy about it. Let it happen and learn from it. Again, I keep going back to holding yourself accountable and the personal responsibility, but that's a big part of it, is to see failure, accept it, accept what your part in it was, learn from it, and move on. And when you can do that easily, you'll be in a whole different league. You'll be on your way to much bigger success for sure.
Before we get into discussing how an athlete can get into a zone, I want to take a left turn, Kathy. Sure. And I want you to speak to like the parent or the sports parent, or what's been labeled like the helicopter parent, the overbearing parent, mm-hmm. or the individual who ties their parenthood to the success of the athlete. Mm-hmm. In situations where it can cause an undue amount of stress mm-hmm. on the young person. What do you say to that individual to help balance things out with what could become, an undue amount of stress and pressure between the student athlete and the parent, which can result in like performance declines or them never reaching their true potential?
Yeah, that definitely is such a double-edged sword. It's so awful. I think the part that parents never understand is that the slightest criticism, no matter how it is delivered to the kid, turns out to be, it's turned quickly to some form of, you don't love me, you don't like me, I'm not enough. No matter what form that criticism is in, it turns quickly to that. And the best thing a parent can do is just to give positive reinforcement at all times. I hope you tried your best. I hope you are happy with your performance. It looked like you performed very well to me. I hope you're happy with it. But any criticism, kids are meaning-making machines. They are making meaning out of everything you say at all times. And so depending on what their mood is, depending on what they've been through, they'll paint that whatever you say with different meaning every time. And instead of trying to stay a step ahead of them, you really can't do that. You're going to just have to be careful and not give them a chance to make any negative meaning out of what you're saying. And any criticism at all, a lot of parents will think they know that sport or what they're doing better, and will attempt to even give them positive criticism, and it just doesn't work. They'll always internalize it to mean something other than it does. And so really the best thing you can do for your kid is just to give them positive reinforcement and to encourage them to do the best they can do. Really, that's what feels good, isn't it, Deshaun? When you're in any type of competition, what feels good is to push yourself to the limit, to push yourself to how far you've trained for and beyond. And that's what really feels good. And that's what you should talk to your kid about. I hope you're happy with your performance. I hope you left it out there. It looked like you did great.
I agree 100%. I had an interview with a gentleman, yesterday, and he's working with a client that signed for $1.5 million out of high school, pitcher. Mm-hmm. The guy has 2 brothers that are in the major leagues. Mm-hmm. And since he was 6 years old, his conversations with his father was basically revolving around it all revolved around performance. So if he had a bad day on the mound, his dad didn't speak to him or had nothing positive to say until he had a good day on the mound. And it's affected him tremendously, where I think the year he signed, I think it was the next season, he ended up having Tommy John surgery on his elbow, if I'm saying this correct. And then the next year, he pretty much washed out, got addicted to opioids. And like right now, I think it's like 4 years later where he's working himself back into the minor league system where the guy's like 6'5", has a fastball 100 miles per hour.
Yeah.
But it's like he's a great bullpen pitcher. But when he hits that mound, everything falls apart. And what his mental toughness coach was explaining to me was that, a lot of that goes back to when he was like a child, coming up in the sport. So it kind of goes back to what we said at the beginning, limiting beliefs, where he has this belief that goes back to the interaction between him and his father, that if he had a bad outing, there was going to be no conversation with his dad.
Yeah.
So you could see how those things would go into the subconscious mind. And so how could he relax when he's on the mound? So it's been very difficult for him to overcome some of his setbacks and his failures.
Yeah, you can't outrun those limiting beliefs. You just can't outrun them. And I think it's a good story. That is a good story for parents to hear. No matter how great you think your intentions are, it's your actions really that are going to install those beliefs and stay with them throughout their lives.
I've had, at the levels that I've played at, high school, college, semi-pro football, playing on 2 different indoor teams. I remember having a streak playing indoor football where I had a 3-touchdown week, then a 4-touchdown week, then a 6-touchdown week specifically, and then another 5-touchdown week where I spent a lot of time watching film, doing workouts and training outside of practice. And I got to a point where in this short window, the game just slowed down where I could see things before they were happening.
Yeah.
Some people call it flow state. Some people call it the zone. If you've experienced it once or if you've experienced it several hundred times, you know what that feels like, whether it's in your executive position, whether it's, in competition, you building a startup, getting into that zone or that flow state is something else. We've often been, it's like, it's hard to describe that feeling. I know what that feels like. I've been there before, maybe not as much as others, but I want you to talk about getting into the zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. Once you experience it, you want more, don't you? And that's really when you can turn over all the technique, all the technical skill to your subconscious mind, while your conscious mind is more engaged in tactical issues. When you can really focus on where you're going to place the ball, not how you're going to hold the racket or how you're going to stand or how you're going to swing it. And getting into that flow state, once definitely you have to have the right conditions, right? Like your skill has to be matched up to your opponent. You have to have enough of a challenge. If you're too far ahead of your opponent, you'll never do it. If you're too far behind your opponent, you'll never do it. And so definitely that is the way that parents can be involved in their kids' performance and help keep them in the right places. Make sure their contest is always one that's matched for their skills. That's really the best thing you could do for them, because then they will have the opportunity to go into flow state, and then they'll have the opportunity to push themselves to their limit and really begin to experience what it's like to have peak performance.
How do you feel about, like, whether it's at practice and definitely on game day, what's your thoughts on like habits or rituals?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? So many athletes are superstitious. I'd really like to know about the correlation there. I think a certain amount of rituals is very good. It's good because you kind of train yourself to get into this program of succeeding. I do think it can go too far. Have you seen Nadal and him lining up his things on the side of the court? It definitely can go too far and slip into OCD type behavior. But I teach my athletes different types of rituals to do. Shooting free throws is a good one. Something like shooting free throws, when you go from this high activity, running really quickly, this type of exertion, to all of a sudden being completely still and shooting free throws, it definitely can help to have a little bit of a ritual to get you through it. And for something like, free throws, of course, adrenaline can make you miss the shot because you're just in this really high state of adrenaline, and now you're calm and relaxed and, standing there still. And then fatigue can also influence your shot. When you've shot thousands of them in practice, and now you've been in this state of fatigue at the end of a game and you're trying to shoot free throws. So I'll always teach them to blink once for adrenaline and then blink again to accommodate fatigue. And when you practice that outside of the game, off the court, and then you get in the game, you can definitely use ritual to help you do that for sure.
I like that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're listening to Kathy Pickel. This has been a great episode. If you're listening to this, please head over to iTunes, Sports Mastery, rate this a 5-star show. I would love your ratings and reviews. This helps us in the rankings. Kathy, I know you offer some goods, or maybe goods, products, services. Where can people find you to learn more about you?
Sure. My website is hypnosisworksatlanta.com. And the service I offer is we start with really defining the type of athlete your kid wants to be, how he wants to think, feel, and act, or how she wants to think, feel, and act. And so we start by defining those 3 things and build the base from there. And as we go, we replace any negative behaviors or limiting beliefs that they might have that will be holding them back. And, we install confidence, teach them the difference between training and performing, help them to increase focus. Stopping hesitation is a big thing. And that's easy to do. It's much better to be decisive than it is correct. And when they understand that, they'll stop their hesitation. And so there's several different protocols and several different methods I use in hypnosis to help them become the athlete they want to be. And, being in hypnosis, that state of trance, it's really just an amplifier of experience. And it helps them to align their thoughts, feelings, and actions and become a tank, become a force to be reckoned with.
The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the parent to work through together. The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the coach to work through together. It was created in a sense and in a way to bridge the gap in communication between these parties and build a successful relationship dynamic. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/workbook or check out the show notes page and click on the link.